Hello everyone! I hope you're all having a wonderful Sunday, and we're back at the 1970 Palma de Mallorca Interzonal tournament. It's round 20, and after 3 consecutive wins, Bobby Fischer faces Canadian Grandmaster Duncan Suttles. He was not a Grandmaster at the time this game was played in 1970, but it's quite a funny story, as Duncan Suttles is perhaps the only person in the world who kind of won his Grandmaster title twice. In 1968 in the Lugano Olympiad in Switzerland, he did achieve his final Grandmaster norm, but it was denied because there was a technicality issue. He played one game extra in this event than he should have to be able to win his Grandmaster norm. But it's quite alright, as he will win his Grandmaster title in 1972, and it will be against former world champion Tigran Petrosian, so definitely a well-earned Grandmaster title. And not only is he a chess grandmaster, he is also a chess grandmaster in correspondence chess. So you do not want to play a slow game against this fellow. Before we check out this game, like we said, round 20, we do have a nice photo challenge, as preparations for our Bobby Fischer series. So here it is. Best of luck to everyone. Who is the gentleman in this photo? So there we have it. This should be an easy one, but you never know. Always good to keep expanding that vast knowledge. Now let's check out this game. There are already a couple of moves on the board, but it's quite alright, as they are the moves from the game. We have e4 by Suttles, and here Fischer goes for knight to f6. Once again, he employs the Alekhine's defense. He refuses to show everyone what he really will play against e4 when the interzonal is over, and when he finally faces the Soviets in the candidates, and after that in the World Chess Championship. Okay, e5, knight to d5, d4, d6, and c4. Knight to b6, this was played in all of the games, and here Fischer already faced in this tournament e captures on d6, but he also already faced f4. So here, as I'm pretty sure Duncan knew that Fischer would go for the Alekhine's defense, he prepared a nice surprise for Fischer. E captures on d6, c captures on d6, and here we have bishop to e3. g6, and here comes d5. This is the surprise, no doubt a home preparation from Duncan. It grabs more space. It doesn't allow Fischer to develop knight to c6, but it does give Fischer this beautiful diagonal here. So Fischer immediately uses it, bishop to g7, and we have bishop to d4, countering Fischer's bishop here on this diagonal. Bishop captures, queen captures, and now you see that this advancing of the d5 pawn doesn't allow Fischer to play knight c6 to kick away the queen, and the queen is occupying a beautiful central square here. Fischer castles, and now comes knight to c3. You definitely don't want to leave that queen on d4, as she is way too powerful there. So Fischer goes e5, and e5 is an excellent move because white would simply allow black too much. If you capture here, then of course black will first develop a knight with tempo. The queen will be under attack. After the queen moves, then bishop captures, and black will be so far ahead in development. The white king is still wide open in the center, and even if you run away with a queenside castle, there are so many pieces already around your king. Rook c8 is coming, will be very uncomfortable for white. So after e5, queen d2 immediately, not grabbing the pawn en passant. F5 now. Fischer claims that white's home preparation isn't really all that much, and that this nice expansion all around his king is quite alright. The king does feel the draft there a bit, but knight bd7 to f6 will create a nice defense. So okay, knight f3, we have knight 8 d7, queenside castle. And here, white could have gone for plenty of different things. Perhaps not going for castles immediately. H4 was an idea, knight g5 was an idea, and perhaps, keeping his options open, but he decided to immediately go for this. So, okay, we have queen to f6 by Fischer, queen to h6 now, and here Fischer, in reply to queen h6, brings this queen back, queen to e7. Because if you continue with something like knight c5, then knight g5 will be a nuisance. Queen e7, you have to defend checkmate here, and then h4 will be troublesome for black. But here, queen to e7 stops this idea, because now if you try knight g5 with the same idea, knight f6, and if you push h4, then knight g4 wins the game, as the queen has nowhere to go. You don't lose the queen, but you have to capture here, and then after captures, white is down a piece, and black is completely winning. So after queen to e7, rook to e1 was an attempt. We have e4 by Fischer, attacking the knight on f3, knight to d2, and now knight to e5. h3, you don't want to allow knight to g4 with an attack on the f2 pawn. So h3, and now comes knight bd7. Queen back to e3, as the attack is pretty much over. You do have to bring your queen back to help out with the defense. Queen to h4, and now g3, kicking the queen back, queen to f3, and king to b1 now. Improving the safety of the king. Knight to c5. Now both of these knights are eyeing that nice d3 square. We have f4, and here Duncan would very much enjoy Bobby to move this knight, for example, to d3. And then after bishop captures, pawn captures, or knight captures, attacking the rook, rook defense. This knight can't really move because there is this annoying threat here, but other than that, white should be able to hold this. So Fischer agrees with him. He does not move the knight, rather he captures on f3 en passant. We have knight captures on f3, and now comes a beautiful move by Fischer, a very nice temporary pawn sacrifice. He pushes f4. You have to react to this. If you don't capture the pawn, then bishop to f5 with check is coming into play, and then the d3 square will be crucial. So here we have pawn captures on f4, and now comes knight captures on f3. Queen captures, and now comes queen to h4. First threatening the rook on e1, as the rook is undefended, and the thing is you have to play something like bishop to e2, which was played in the game. You don't want to go bishop to d3, in front of that knight. Bishop to g2 doesn't work because the c4 pawn is now undefended. And after rook captures on f4, you have to move the queen. Then bishop comes into play, first bishop f5, check king a1, and then you even lose the c4 pawn, and then white is busted here. So after queen to h4, bishop to e2, keeping an eye on the c4 pawn. Bishop to f5 check, first Fischer brings the bishop into the game. King to a1, and now comes rook 8 to e8. Fischer mobilizes all of his pieces. The final rook is now comes into play. Rook c1. As the bishop on e2 was pinned, we have bishop to e4, forcing now a trade, unless you want to lose the exchange. Knight captures, and now rook to h2. We have rook captures on f4, queen to c3, and now queen to e7, pressuring this bishop here. Bishop to f1 is played, and now comes rook to e3. Fischer increases the pressure here. Queen to d2, and now there are two ways that increase the pressure here. You can even play this rook to e4 or this rook to f3. Fischer decides to go rook e to f3, now once again attacking the bishop here. And now if you move the bishop, then you get rook to f2 with a double attack on the bishop. After captures, again there's a double attack. You can't move the bishop, you're going to lose the queen after rook comes here. Queen e5, and white is completely pinned down here. There's really nothing he can do. Black will simply push a5, a4, a3, bust open the king, and it's game over. White can never really push a3 because knight checks the king here, wins the queen. So white would be lost here. So after rook e to f3, rook to e2, attacks Fischer's queen, queen to f6, and now comes bishop to g2. You don't want to play something like rook e8 check, king f7 will simply attack the rook, and there will be a triple attack against this bishop here. As you can see here, Fischer's Alekhine gun is very nicely employed here. So bishop to g2, attacking the rook, rook to f2 as planned, rook c to e1, and here Fischer simply exchanges. Rook captures, and now rook captures on c4. Here Fischer did basically the entire thing he wanted to do. First, when he played that f4 move, he sacrificed a pawn temporarily, and now when all is said and done, it is actually Fischer who is up a pawn, and now, there's really nothing to do here for white. Queen to e3 is played, and Fischer immediately goes for queen to e5, offers to trade queens. White doesn't even have the luxury of trading queens because rook to c1 will be checkmate. So first you have to stop that. King to b1 is played, and now Fischer exchanges queens, as there are a lot of other ways you can play this position, but Fischer is confident in his ability to win this game being a pawn up. Rook captures, and now rook to f4. Preparing rook f2, bishop to f3, not allowing rook to come to the second rank, and now h5. King to c2, Duncan brings his king into the game, king f7, Fischer does the same, king d2, and now here a very interesting situation. You want to play rook h4, but before playing rook h4, Fischer actually plays rook to b4. Rook to b4 is a move that Engine prefers only slightly above rook to h4, because it forces the king to move back from the center to protect the b2 pawn. King to c3 is played, and only now rook to h4, attacking the h3 pawn. Slight difference, but everything matters in the end game. Bishop to e2, if you move the bishop or something, so the rook can defend the pawn, then knight to e4 is coming with check, knight to f2 is coming, and then the pawn will be lost. So after rook to h4, b4, attacking Fischer's knight, knight to d7, and now bishop to e2, now the rook is guarding the h3 pawn. We have knight to f6, and now rook to f3, pinning the knight so the d5 pawn cannot be captured, king to g7, unpinning, and now rook d3, again protecting the pawn. We have g5, Fischer is preparing to push g4 and create a passed pawn, a3, and now g4. If you capture, h captures, the passed pawn is created. You can't go something like rook g3 to block it, because knight e4 check here will win the rook. So after g4, bishop to f1 is played. We have knight to e4, this comes with check, king c2, and now knight to f2, attacking the rook and the h3 pawn. Rook to e3, and now g captures on h3, creating a beautiful passed pawn that's defended twice. There's really nothing to do here. Rook to e7 was played in the game. Fischer played king to f8, attacking the rook, and it was in this position that Duncan Suttles decided to resign the game on move 52. Why did he resign? His rook is under attack. After you move the rook, of course, you don't want to push something like h2 immediately here, because then you could even survive this after rook captures on f2, because this comes with check. King g7, then bishop to g2, and after you bring a queen into the game, black is still better here, but you are up a pawn in a rook's endgame, so you would still have to, work for your meal. So after this, rook to e2, first you don't want to push h2, simply rook to f4, you defend the knight, and now the h3 pawn is also guarded, preparing to push it. King d2, now you push h2, bishop to g2, defending, and now after you bring the queen into the game, bishop captures, knight captures, black will be up a pawn, but also up a whole knight. So yeah, after king to f8, Duncan didn't want to have any more part in this game, and he decided to resign. So a very nice game by Fischer. This is his third game in the Palma de Mallorca 1970 Interzonal tournament, where he employed the Alekhine's defense, and in this game also the Alekhine's gun. So very nice, and he did not lose a single game using the Alekhine's defense. So very nice for him, as the Soviets will not know what he plays for real when they play e4 against him. So yeah, that's the game. Duncan Suttles versus Robert James Fischer of the 1970 Palma de Mallorca Interzonal Tournament, round 20. I do hope you enjoyed it, and that you're enjoying the coverage of the Bobby Fischer series. We are very near the end of the Palma de Mallorca Interzonal, so, be prepared for that. I would like to thank Julian Schoen, Sebastian Bardon, Nikolai Dobrev, and Danny McCullough for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check all my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon with a couple of more games from the Bobby Fischer series, and perhaps if something unexpected arises, we're gonna cover that as well. And on a side note, I did a friend of mine who is really into Magic the Gathering invited me for an early access to Magic the Gathering Arena, and I have to say I am beyond impressed how they made everything. The interface is wonderful, and everything is just highly enjoyable. So if you can, do check it out. So yeah, thank you all, and I'll see you soon.